Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. As a reminder, before we get into today's case, I am going on live tour and I am so excited because I'm going to be able to deliver these cases to you guys in person, sitting down. We have exclusive cases we'll be doing, Q&As, a lot of interesting stuff, but tickets are limited. They're almost gone. So we're coming to a city near you. We're going to like Phoenix, San Diego, Salt Lake City, Denver, some others. So you can get all of the details at annieelise.com. Go to the events page. It'll show you the cities, the dates, the links to the venues so you could buy tickets. It's better to buy the tickets through those links than going to Ticketmaster or StubHub because resale is like not the move. I think you can get them as easy as like $29 direct. But again, we don't have many left, so go check that out. Grab your bestie, grab a ticket, and come see me. I'm going to be doing meet and greets after, just nothing where you have to buy a ticket for that or anything. I'm just going to come into the crowd and like talk with all of you guys. But anyways, I am really excited because I'm excited to just meet so many of you in person. I had such a great time at CrimeCon this year, meeting and talking with so many of you, so I'm excited to be able to do that again. Today's case has got a lot of red flags. So we did this on I think quite a few cases ago, where what I want you guys to do is in the comments, as you hear of as you hear a red flag and identify one, I want you to comment with the timestamp. I'm just curious, who's going to catch the first red flag in this? Because there are a lot. It's a wild one, guys. It's a complex case. It's a recent case. It happened in 2022. And guys, without further ado, let's jump right in. So in 2022, Kirby Carpenter was 36 years old. He had been born in Tupelo, Mississippi to his parents Maddie Jones and Jerry Carpenter, and even though he was born in Tupelo, he was actually raised in Kasuth. Now I hope I said those right, guys, but words are hard. You know I'm not good at pronunciating cities, so just take it with a grain of salt. 2 towns in Mississippi, which are about a 45 to 50 minute drive from one another, give or take. So that's where he went to high school until he graduated. Now, being born and raised in the country, he was pretty much always sporting like a flannel and cowboy boots, you know, the gear. He knew how to get more formal when he had to, but if it wasn't absolutely necessary, then he was definitely going to be wearing something where he could easily run around outside and get dirty. Now, if you've never heard of Kasuth before, there's probably a pretty good reason why. It is so small that it's not even considered a city or a town, but actually a village. The population in 2010 was a whopping 209 people. So it's a really, really rural area where everybody pretty much knows everyone, and most of the locals have been living there for generations. Now, growing up somewhere like that, Kirby definitely had a love for all things outdoors, and anything that could give him just kind of like this spike of adrenaline. He loved driving every kind of fast car or motorcycle. He also loved to go hunting, shoot guns, go on trips where he could get his hands dirty, sightsee, get fresh air, just be outside, right? So after graduating from high school, Kirby enlisted in the Marines, which he was always extremely proud of. After his time in the military, Kirby then really hit the ground running with his career. He had always wanted to be a successful businessman, and instead of just daydreaming about what it would be like or what he would do and how that would happen, he worked hard every single day until that dream became a reality. He opened up 2 separate businesses, which he built from the ground up, before he then sold them both. He also dabbled a little bit in rental properties, and he was pretty good at it. He brought in pretty good money. So by 2022, he was the owner and operator of a business called Mississippi Gold, Silver, and Coin Exchange. Now, something that I think is really special and says a lot about Kirby's personality and character is that he never forgot where he came from. Even after he started making lots and lots of money, he was grounded. He knew his roots. He knew where he came from. At one point in his life, he had nothing, but he made himself into something, and now he had even more than he could have ever imagined. A lot of people who knew Kirby said that he was always trying to help people out, and not in a bragging kind of way or a now you owe me kind of way, like something like that. He just genuinely wanted to help people. He was kind. Some people said that if he saw them at the gas station, he would just go in and pay for their gas before he could. I mean, just truly a pay it forward type of person. The same thing happened for a lot of people that he bumped into while they were grocery shopping. Just little things here and there that to him, with the money that he was bringing in, was basically nothing. But to some people, I mean, $100 in groceries or a full tank of gas, it could make a huge difference in their lives. Now, as for how he was able to become so successful, well, his friends and family members all joked around that he was a jack of all trades. He was just one of those people who made it look so easy. And really, any new thing that he tried, he was always good at. He was one of those people who kind of left you asking, like, is there anything that you can't do? Do you have to be good at everything? So Kirby was good at a lot of things and had a lot of different accomplishments in both his career and his personal life, and he was proud of them. But the thing that he was proud of the most, above everything else, were his children, having the title of dad.
What? What? What are you saying? Hey, what are you doing? Goodness. Hey, Towns. Hey there. Bless you.
His oldest son was named Towns, and while Kirby's relationship with Towns' mom, Whitney, didn't work out, they did work together to co-parent and focus on the most important thing, which was their son. So after Kirby and Whitney broke up, he met a woman named Caitlin Spence, and the two of them hit it off immediately. I mean, I'm talking there was an instant connection, and it really felt different from any other relationship that Kirby had been in before. He was excited. It was new. It was a spark that he hadn't felt. Kirby knew that Caitlin was somebody that he wanted to spend his life with, somebody he wanted to build a family with. Eventually, the couple moved into a stunning property in a community called Dry Creek, which is right outside of Booneville, Mississippi. The property itself sat on 10 sprawling acres, and it was right next to another property that Kirby happened to own, which was another 125 acres. Actually, I think it was 127. So that alone should tell you just how successful Kirby was in all of his different lines of work. I can only imagine how much 127 acres of land would cost. I mean, a lot, right? No matter even if you are in the rural areas, like it'd be a lot, right? But all of that aside, I mean, for two people who loved being outdoors and living this very rural country lifestyle, this was as close to heaven on earth as they were going to get. And after living together for a while, the couple learned some very exciting news. Caitlin was pregnant. Now, Kirby already loved being a dad to Towns, so now learning that he was about to be a father of two made him feel just over the moon. On top of that, it was going to be with somebody who he had these very intense, strong feelings for. Somebody he was already building an amazing life with. So how much more perfect could it get, right? It's the dream. It's the fantasy. They learned that the baby was going to be a little girl, and they decided on the name Enola. Enola was born in July of 2022, and Kirby, Caitlin, and Big Brother Towns were just absolutely in love with her right from the beginning. After Enola was born, Caitlin's parents, Jeffrey and Karen Spence, offered to come and stay with the family for a week or two to help them, get used to having a newborn in the house, get adjusted, maybe take some of the night shifts off their hands. And Kirby and Caitlin both agreed that having her parents come to town would be very, very helpful. So they gave them the green light to pack their bags and head to Mississippi. There weren't any plans that were super set in stone, but everybody was under the impression that it would kind of just be for a week or two, while Kirby and Caitlin were settling in as a family of four, kind of getting adjusted, catching up on sleep, that sort of thing. However, Jeffrey and Karen, they ended up sticking around for a lot more than a week or two. And it wasn't just 3 weeks or a month or even 2 months. They ended up staying at Kirby and Caitlin's house for 4 entire months. Now, what's that saying? My dad always says it, actually, which it's like such a dad saying. But what is it? It's like house guests are like fish. After a week, they start smelling or something like that. I probably butchered that. Maybe I should call my dad. But my dad always says it, and that's such a lame expression now that I think about it. But anyways, they were staying for 4 months. Now, it might have sounded perfect at first when the new parents just needed some extra sleep and help with cooking or doing the dishes. But imagine your in-laws, essentially, being in your home for 4 months. I hope my in-laws aren't watching this, but I think that a lot of people would agree that it's not ideal. it could be a little bit intrusive. It could be a little bit overbearing. I love my in-laws. They're the best, and they actually do stay with us for weeks at a time, and I love that. But I mean, coming up on half a year, that'd feel like a lot.
So the baby, they had been going together about almost 3 years, not quite. The baby was born in July, and yes, she was staying there. And the mom and dad had came down from Virginia to spend. They were going to spend a couple of weeks and help her after the baby was born, and so um, they did. They spent a couple of weeks, but they also spent 4 months. They never left. Um, I know that Kirby and her both were probably tired of them being there, which I know they were, but it's just like they came and they didn't leave.
I'm sure the house with that many acres had plenty of guest room, so I highly doubt that they were on top of each other at all times. I mean, who knows? Maybe it wasn't that big of a deal having them around. I just wanted to mention that because I feel like it's common for family members, to come into town when a baby's born, but not so common for them to stay for 4 months straight. I don't know. I also want to bring it up to just show that they clearly were not in any single kind of hurry to leave. So anyways, from the outside looking in and through social media sites like Facebook, Kirby, Caitlin, and the two kids looked to be living a very happy and fulfilling life. Kirby's family was happy to have Caitlin in the family, and they were happy that she was the mother of one of Kirby's children. Kirby and Caitlin never really fought. It seemed like they got along really well, so like I said, all looked picture perfect from the outside looking in. That is until one day when everything unexpectedly took a turn for the worse, and life as they knew it came crashing down. The family had just celebrated Thanksgiving together, and Enola was now 4 months old. Everyone was looking forward to the most magical and wonderful warm time of the year that was right around the corner. This would be Enola's first Christmas, and there's nothing more pure than that during the holidays in like the first year, their first experience to everything, celebrating as a family, like I said, the warmth of the home, all of those things. Now remember, Jeffrey and Karen, Caitlin's parents, were still staying with Kirby and Caitlin. I couldn't find anything that specifically clarified what everybody's thought process was around this time, like if Kirby was wanting them to leave and Caitlin wouldn't tell them to, or like I said, maybe they didn't mind having the company, I don't know. But I do know that after 4 months straight of being in the house, Caitlin's parents finally decided to pack their bags and head back to Virginia. This was on December 1st. So they left Caitlin, Kirby, and the kids on their own for the first time in months. They decided that they wanted to head back home so that they could be with their family back in Virginia for the upcoming holidays. Now, I'm sure it was a little bit daunting for Caitlin and Kirby knowing that they were going to be on their own for the first time and responsible for everything around the house. But it's not like it was anything that they couldn't handle. I mean, they were all going to be on their own like that eventually. But then on December 2nd, Kirby's mother, Maddie, got a text message from Caitlin that completely turned her world as she knew it upside down. Caitlin texted her and was asking if she had heard or seen from Kirby. Maddie hadn't, and she was confused what Caitlin even meant. They lived together, so obviously Caitlin would have seen him before his mom did. So she figured that maybe his phone had just died at work or something like that. But that's when his mom learned that Caitlin wasn't just trying to tell her that she hadn't heard from Kirby in a few hours. She told her that she had not seen Kirby in days.
So she called me. I was helping out at this little store. She called me and she said she first led me to believe that Kirby hadn't came home overnight. And the more I talked to her, she ended up telling me that he hadn't been home actually for 2 days. Well, of course, I got really scared because it's not like Kirby. Like I said, he had his rituals, the way he done things, and I knew he was going to be in his bed at night, and he was going to wake up in his bed in the morning.
Which days? That's kind of weird, right? Because Caitlin's parents were staying with her, and so did they notice that Kirby was missing, or did he not say goodbye to them when they drove back to Virginia? Did he leave that day or the night before? It just felt weird that she hadn't heard from Kirby in days. So at first, his mom's mind immediately went to some kind of work deal gone wrong. Kirby did work in the gold and silver business after all, so it's not too out there to think that maybe somebody wanted to hurt him, or that maybe he might have even been a victim of a robbery gone wrong. His mom even asked Caitlin if anything had been going on at his job, but Caitlin said that Kirby didn't tell her much of anything when it came to his work life. He kind of checked that at the door and kept it more to himself. Now, keep in mind that Caitlin called his mom on a Friday, and when she did, Caitlin told her that she hadn't seen or heard from Kirby since Wednesday, so 2 full days. His mom was understandably freaking out at this point. I mean, it wasn't like Kirby to just not come home for 2 days straight, especially with a newborn at home. Like, make it make sense. It does not make sense. But Caitlin kind of was a little nonchalant about the entire situation.
So I told her, I said, I'm going to put an APB out on him. And so she said, well, wait and let me walk up to the deer stand and check on him, check to see if he's up there. I said, well, he's not been up there for 2 days.
Now, why this was her first thought process, I have no idea. I would think if my husband has been gone for 2 days without sending so much as one text even, then he probably isn't just chilling in the woods getting some hunting time in. And if I found out that he was, I'd be hunting his ass next. I probably shouldn't say that on here, but I would be freaking enraged. Also, it was really cold out. She even said herself that she had to bundle herself and the baby just to go check it out. So it seems unlikely to me that he would just be up there for days without coming home to get his warm winter coat or whatever else he needed to stay warm. But I guess Caitlin was so freaked out that maybe she just wasn't thinking super logically about what might have really happened to Kirby. And then around 30 minutes later, his mom got yet another phone call from Caitlin. Caitlin told her that she had just checked the tree stand and he wasn't up there either. But then, while his mom was still on the line, Caitlin started shouting, and I can only imagine the way that his mom's stomach probably dropped in that moment hearing those sounds.
A few minutes later, which she said that she didn't see him. And then all of a sudden, she said, Kirby, 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 just like that. And I said, what is going on? And I guess she cut me off. I don't know what happened, but I just took off to the house. I called my husband on the way, and I told him, I said, get to Kirby's house. And that's all I could say over and over was just get to Kirby's, get to Kirby's, get to Kirby's.
Pretty much the moment they parked and got out of the car, they could hear Caitlin screaming, and it sounded like she was on the phone with 911. That's when they saw her standing over Kirby's body, which was lying lifeless on the ground next to the carport. The whole scene was just really odd. It almost looked at first like Kirby had been doing some sort of work around the house and that a toolbox had fallen on top of him and injured him. But his body was covered up and then the toolbox was lying on top of everything. It was odd. Immediately, things just looked a little too set up. I mean, if a toolbox fell, how did the covering end up between the box and Kirby's body? Maybe if the toolbox was sitting next to a blanket and they both fell down together, I could see things landing like that. Maybe then Kirby, then the blanket, then the toolbox. But in that case, the covering wouldn't be neatly spread out. It would have been wadded up, right? Something like that. So really, the only way that Kirby could have ended up this way was if he fell, and then somebody covered him up, and then they set the toolbox down, or it fell down on top of everything. Everyone else was kind of stunned and not thinking very clearly. So they didn't immediately consciously register, how off everything looked, how off it was. Kirby's stepdad was the first person to get over his shock, his disbelief. So he, I will say, took one for the team in a situation like this, and he's the one who ended up pulling back the covering to see how badly he truly was hurt. And when he did, Kirby's lifeless eyes just stared back at him. The stepdad also could see blood, and lots of it. It was coming from below his head, kind of in his chest area, which I cannot imagine the trauma of seeing something like that, but it was enough to confirm that there was no saving Kirby.
It was devastating. It's something that I live with every day, every morning, every night, 24/7. It's always on my mind. It's never off. It was a day that no mother should ever have to go through.
I can't imagine how it would feel if in just a couple of hours, Kirby's mother went from learning that Kirby had been MIA for 2 days to now standing next to her son's lifeless body and being so confused as to what even happened. When the officers and the paramedics arrived, they confirmed what the family already knew. Kirby was dead, and there was nothing that they could do to help him anymore. Now, as for Caitlin's reaction when Kirby was declared as dead, well, let's just say that her reaction was very different from Kirby's family's reaction. Kirby's sister, Casey, has been very outspoken in the media about Kirby's whole case, and she's even in charge of a Facebook page that is dedicated to Kirby's memory as well as justice for Kirby. And Casey has pretty much been the unofficial spokesperson of the family, so even though she wasn't there at the scene when Kirby was pronounced dead, she has spoken out about Caitlin's reactions as seen through Kirby and Casey's mom's eyes.
When the officer walked up, the girlfriend said, "Oh my goodness, Kirby's killed himself, he's committed." And the officer said, "Ma'am, this is a homicide." And of course I wasn't there for any of that, but that's what, my stepdad told us had happened. We got there, and of course they wouldn't let any of us come up the hill next to his home. We had to stay at the bottom of the hill. My mom was there. It was very, very difficult and has continued to be very difficult to see the pain that my mama is in.
Even before anyone could take Kirby's body in for an autopsy, it was very clear that his wounds were from a gunshot, and they weren't self-inflicted. Kirby's family found it kind of interesting, or at least odd, that Caitlin's first go-to was that he had taken his own life. She wasn't asking what happened or how it happened, and she clearly wasn't considering how the covering would have been on top of him if he had just harmed himself. It was kind of odd. The stark contrast between how Kirby's mom and stepdad were reacting versus how Caitlin was reacting.
I want to know what happened. I want to know what his last words were. I want to know if he said mama. A lot of the struggles is just being able to go out and sit on the porch in the morning and I see the sunrise and I think, he's seen his last sunrise.
Kirby's case was immediately treated as a homicide. The family was asked to leave the scene while everything was taped off and processed, which they were all willing to do. They were still so in shock and so upset, though, that they weren't even in a position to speculate on who might be to blame. So they were willing to just step back, let the police do their jobs, get answers for us. Now, as for myself, looking in from the outside and with more of an unbiased eye, I'm immediately giving Caitlin some side eye, if you know what I mean. Something does not smell right. First, her boyfriend is missing for 2 days and she doesn't say anything. That doesn't sound right. I've also got to wonder how she would miss the sound of a gun going off on her property. Not to mention that she jumped straight to telling the police that Kirby's injuries were self-inflicted, like she was trying to throw them off the trail of what really happened. I don't know, maybe I've been in the true crime world too much, but something just ain't landing for me. On top of that, when Caitlin was on the phone with Kirby's mom, she said that she was going to look for Kirby in the woods where he liked to hunt. But to get there, she would have had to walk right past that carport. So you've got to wonder why she didn't see Kirby then before she was on her way back, right? Now, in fairness, a lot of people who started looking into the case were kind of on the fence about whether or not they believed that Caitlin would have seen the body. For me, when I heard about where Kirby's body was found, my first thought was, how did Caitlin not notice that her boyfriend was lying dead right next to a carport? It's not like he was deep in the woods or covered or hidden. Unless the carport was far away from the house, maybe. That sounds a little pointless. You don't want to have to walk a really long distance in the rain or the snow to get to your front door from the car. But I thought that it would be helpful to have an idea of the layout of Kirby's house and the carport as well, just to see how everything lined up. Well, Kirby's sister Casey actually uploaded a video to that Facebook page, Justice for Kirby, which shows exactly where Caitlin was walking that day and where Kirby's body was found.
This is Casey. I'm Kirby's sister, and I am going to video the path that the person living in the home with Kirby at the time he was killed says that she took on Friday morning when she was going to look for him. Currently, I'm standing in Kirby's living room. The person told us that morning as she was going to go out to look for him to see if he was in his deer stand, that she walked straight out this back door, straight up the hill, all the way up the hill, and then to the deer stand. So I'm just going to show you the terrain that she would have had to cross to do that. She claimed that she had her 13-pound baby attached to her, wearing her at the time. It is a little muddy today, so excuse me while I walk through. Okay, she said she walked straight out the door, which is there. Sorry, that's my friend. Straight up the hill. The reason that is relevant is because Kirby's body was laying
next to those toolboxes where they are, about in this area. So if she had looked right, she would have seen his body. But she says that she did not, that she walked directly up this hill that I'm about to attempt to do. And I actually don't know if I can. Okay, as you can see, my attempt up the hill failed. I'm standing on the back porch, looking at the hill directly in front of me. You can see where I slid down the hill. I am not able to go up that hill. I have attempted several times since his death and have not been able on my own. And I am of much smaller stature and not carrying a baby. Also, just so you're aware or can see, this is what you're looking at when you walk out the back porch. So, this hill, very steep. Also, behind the air conditioner unit there, Kirby's side-by-side was parked. So, typically, if Kirby went into the woods to the deer stand to hunt, he would have gone on his side-by-side. He would not have walked that distance, nor would she have, in my opinion. But you can see that there is, on down here, kind of a less steep trail that Kirby had made to go up and then over to the deer stand, which is way down there. But of course, had she walked this direction to go up that hill in attempts to look for him in the deer stand, which is what she said she was doing, then she would have been walking directly to where his body laid, which was right here. Said that she came back down the hill this way, that she didn't go back down the big part of the hill that she went up. Again, house, area where Kirby's body laid. She says that while she was walking this way with the baby in the cold, baby had the flu, that she was taking the cleared out path to come back down from the deer stand, which would have been there. And that, as you can see how that's nice and clear, and it just zigzags back to the left to get to his deer stand, which is way down there. She claims that as she was coming down this hill, that this is the point where she saw Kirby's boots, which were the house end, not the gas tank end, sticking up from underneath what he was covered with.
There's also the fact that his truck was there in the garage. So did she never think to herself that it was weird for his truck to be there but not him? And for 2 days straight at that? I just can't wrap my head around how she somehow missed his body lying on the property for what seems like at least 2 days. Or that he was missing but his truck was still there. Something isn't adding up. Now, the weirdest part of all of this was that Caitlin didn't have any real motive to want to hurt Kirby. And before this point, nobody in Kirby's family had any problems with her.
Leading up to Kirby's death, were there any red flags, any signs, any fighting between Caitlin and Kirby?
No. No, there was none. Even when investigators went through his phone and everything, there was no arguing right then. No. Not around any of that time, no.
It was Caitlin's actions after Kirby's death that even made anybody start to question if maybe she knew more than what she was leading everybody to believe.
Law enforcement officers that night decided to, I guess, declare the scene to be cleared, that they had processed what they felt like they needed to process at that time. They called my stepdad and they said, hey, we need the girlfriend and you or someone to come down. Let us give you all, the okay, y'all can come in the home, whatever. So my stepdad asked me, would I go with the girlfriend back to Kirby's house, see what law enforcement needed us to do from there. So I get in my car, drive there, in her car, and comes down there, and we get down there. She was asked to sit in the car with one of the MBI, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation officers. She had asked me to tend to the baby while she was able to talk to her for a while, and question her about some things. After that was done, they told us, no one needs to stay here tonight, which, none of us would have dreamed of staying there that night. But they said, you can go in with her to get her and the baby some things. So we walked inside. She and I did. She had the baby. She walked straight to the nursery, sat the baby down in the rocker there, and she leaned up against the changing table. And she kind of slid herself down the wall, and she looked up at me and she said, Casey, I did not hurt your brother. And I said, no one said that you did. And she said, do I need a lawyer? And I said, do you need a lawyer? And she said, the questions that lady asked me, she makes me think that they think I had something to do with this. And I said, you're the last person who saw him. You're his significant other. They're going to ask you questions. We left, we went to my mom's. My sister lives in another state. She and her husband had come in. They were all going to stay at mom's that night. Me, my husband, and girls came home later that night to try to get some rest. Got up the next morning. We went and got some breakfast from one of the restaurants to take, there was a lot of people at the house there. We wanted to make sure everybody had food. We got there the next morning, I would say probably around 9:30, and walked in, and I was going to go, check on the baby when I got there. And we got to mom's, and I looked around, the girlfriend, the baby wasn't there. And so I went to my sister, and I was like, hey, where's girlfriend and Enola? And she said, well, she went back to the house her parents are supposed to be in here soon. They're on their way. And I said, did they go by themselves? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, is it even safe? Is that safe for her to be there with the baby, by herself? And she was like, I don't know. She just said she needs to go meet her parents.
I would think that if Caitlin wasn't involved and knew for a fact that she wasn't involved, that she'd be very willing to do an interview with the police and say everything that she knew, to help the police find the killer, right? And it should pretty much be common sense that they're going to interview you and ask you plenty of questions since you were the last one to see him and you were the one to find his body. Not to mention, partners are usually the first person that police will go to with any questions and the first person that they will want to clear. It's nothing personal, it's just how it goes. So shouldn't she want to help them out as much as she possibly could? Again, especially if she knew that there was nothing to worry about or nothing to hide. Kirby's autopsy report confirmed that his cause of death was a gunshot wound, either from a shotgun or from a gun that shot shotgun-style shells. The autopsy report also said that by the time he was found, he had been dead for 2 days. So he had been dead since Wednesday, November 30th. And again, this kind of made Kirby's family scratch their heads with confusion. On Thursday, Caitlin had been in contact with both his sister Casey and with his mom Maddie. Enola apparently had a doctor's appointment that day, and she sent them pictures of the little stickers that they sometimes give you at these appointments. And she gave them the baby's updated weight, height, things like that. So wouldn't she have said something at that point? Remember if he was missing too? She also had asked Casey and Maddie if they had heard from Kirby that day, but both of them said no, they hadn't. But that was the end of the conversation. Then on Thursday night, Caitlin and the baby were actually over at his mom's house when his sister Casey was there too. And she claimed that Caitlin never once brought up that Kirby hadn't come home the night before, or that she still hadn't heard from him. Just nothing. So to me, I don't know, that's a red flag. That is strange as hell, right? But again, nobody was really pointing fingers at first. Instead, the focus was a lot more on what kind of evidence the police were finding. The evidence included a receipt from Kroger in the pocket of Kirby's jeans. The groceries that were listed on the receipt were actually in the back of his truck too, so he clearly had been coming home from the store when he was attacked. He just never even had the chance to make it inside the house. Whoever did this to him must have been sitting and waiting for the perfect time when he was alone and when he was vulnerable and when they could strike. Kirby's family and the investigators were stumped on the question of why. Like I said earlier, Kirby was a really kind person to everybody he met. He was generous, he was a friend to everybody. He was also a former Marine, which earned him plenty of respect even from people who he didn't really know. He didn't have any enemies, he just wasn't that kind of guy. Except according to his sister Casey, Caitlin didn't seem all that confused about why Kirby had been murdered. At least not like everybody else was. Her explanation was that it was probably some, quote, meth heads who wanted his money. However, nobody was buying that. Instead, the only somewhat logical reason that anybody else could think of was the one that his mom Maddie had initially worried about. Maybe it had something to do with his business and with his wealth. But even that just didn't make a whole lot of sense, because why shoot him dead when he's coming inside from the grocery store? I mean, what did that do? It's not like he was carrying all of this gold and silver or his fortune on him in cash while he was out running errands to the local Kroger. Shooting him wouldn't make the killer any richer. I mean, it would be way much easier to break into the house while nobody was home and then grab some of the expensive things that were there, right? Not to mention his body was covered up. Not very many murderers are going to bother to do that. They're just going to flee the scene. His sister Casey even said that whoever covered him up did it because they didn't want to see what they had done. So to her, it felt personal, not like some random attack. None of it added up or made any logical sense whatsoever. And needless to say, it was a confusing time in general, and also a really stressful time. Kirby's whole family was coming together not only to grieve, but also to support each other and plan a funeral. So everyone was pretty much getting together at his mom Maddie's house. That's also where Caitlin and the baby were staying until they were given the okay to go back home. So on December 3rd, the day after Kirby's body was found, Caitlin left his mom's house and told Kirby's family that she was going to go meet her parents at the house where she lived with Kirby. Now remember, her parents had literally just left town the night before Kirby's body was found, but now they were making their way back to be supportive for her. Now, obviously, Caitlin was a grown woman, so it's not like his mom could have been like, no, you're not allowed to go back to that house that you live in, but she had concerns about it. The main one being that she didn't know if it was safe for her and the baby to be there on their own. He had been killed. What if somebody came back to finish the job? What if they came back to attack her? It might have made a little more sense if Caitlin's parents were already back and the three of them were there together, but Caitlin's parents were still on their way. So it was just going to be Caitlin and the baby sitting at home in a literal crime scene. But Caitlin didn't seem concerned or scared.
They just, that night, she was going to stay down there, and I told her, no, you're going to the house. You know, what if whoever done this comes back? She said, I'll be all right here. I said, no, you're going home. You're going with us. So she come up to my house and stayed that night. But the next morning, she was up early, and she was ready to go back down there just as soon as she got up. And I'm like, you do not need to go down there by yourself. Somebody's going to go with you. She said, no, my parents will be there in just a little bit. So she went on down there. And it seems that it was like she was not worried about anything. There was never a tear shed from her.
Now, I personally think that this was another red flag. However, in the grand scheme of everything that was going on, it kind of got ignored, or at least pushed to the side a bit. Kirby's family later said that they were all just so deep in the grieving process that things that they normally might have questioned or found to be a bit strange were just kind of going over their heads. That's not what they were focusing on. Nobody was thinking straight at that time, understandably. I mean, I can't even imagine. So Caitlin's parents came back to town, and I'm assuming that they were cleared to be back at the house by the investigators, though I can't imagine anybody would willingly want to be there, but that's just me. So by Sunday, which was 2 days after Kirby's body was found, Kirby's family was still trying to gather their thoughts and start making plans for what they were going to do moving forward.
The first few days, our crime lab was so backed up. Of course, it took them. We found him December the 2nd. He was actually killed on November the 30th, and our crime lab was so far behind. He had to be at the funeral home for quite a few days. We ended up not having his funeral actually until the 17th of December.
Even though Kirby was young, he was only 36 years old when he passed away, he had told his family a bunch of times that he planned to write, if not a legally binding will, then at least a list of his wishes for who gets what to do with the business, and so on. Which I think a lot of people do that. Even if you don't have a will or a living trust, you kind of write down what you would want and hope that that holds up. I mean, life is always shorter than we think it will be, and given how rich he was and how much wealth he had to manage, it was definitely a smart choice. So on that Sunday, his sister Casey and his mom Maddie decided that they would go over to Kirby and Caitlin's house to check in on the baby and get into Kirby's safe. They knew that if he had written down any of this, like he said he would, then the documents would definitely be inside his safe. Now, from what I can tell, this trip over to the house turned out to be the thing that finally made the gears start turning. It finally helped Kirby's family start putting two and two together and give them reason to actually be suspicious of Caitlin. When they arrived at the house, they started noticing things that seemed a little off or different from what they had seen on Friday when they were last over there. The first thing was that there were tire marks in the backyard leading up to the back door. It looked like somebody had pulled up a truck literally to the door, which obviously was very odd. The second thing they noticed right away was that the doorknobs on the doors looked different, like they had been replaced with new ones. Which, okay, not that big of a deal. The tire tracks could have been from the police cars, who knows. There were a ton of people in and out and around the crime scene, so who knows what it's from. As far as the doorknobs, though, they were staying at a house where somebody was brutally murdered and the murderer hadn't yet been found. So if Kirby's death was money-related, it made total sense to switch out the locks, change the knobs, even change out a whole freaking door as a precaution, right? There was a reason to explain all of it. It wasn't until his mom and sister started going towards Kirby's room that had the safes full of his guns, money, gold, silver, that things started to take a turn. And it's worth mentioning that at the time, Caitlin was not home. It was just her parents and the baby. They said that she was out spending some girl time to just relax and get away from everything, whatever, no big deal. I also wanted to mention that on both Friday and Saturday, his mom, Maddie, had actually checked the safes pretty quickly before leaving, just to see if the investigators had taken anything when they were searching the house. And when she looked inside very quickly, she noticed that nothing looked out of place, so she shut it and left, and that was that. On Sunday, though, now they had a lot of problems trying to get into that safe.
As soon as my mom approaches the safe room, the girlfriend's dad follows her to the door of the safe room. And I can hear him from the other side of the wall. Like I said, I'm sitting playing with the baby at the time. And I hear him say, "Now, Maddie, this is what I'm talking about. We don't need you down here causing problems." And so I'm like, what is going on, you know? And so I go around the corner and he's like standing in the doorway, you know, kind of talking to her confrontationally, I guess you could say. And I'm like, "Excuse me, how is she causing problems? Like, we have to bury my brother." And he says, "Well, we just don't need any problems." And my little girl was with us. And I don't know if it's because she came up or if because the conversation was kind of becoming confrontational. He said, "Do you want to talk about this in the garage?" And I said, "Sure, I'll talk about this in the garage." So we got to the garage and I'm like, what's the problem? And he said, "Well, we've heard that you guys are saying that y'all think that my daughter had something to do with Kirby's death." And I said, "Well, actually, we haven't said that. And at this point, we hadn't." Right. You know, and I was like, "Well, we haven't said that, and I don't know who told you that." And I was like, "But this, you're not from here. We are. This is a small town. You're going to hear all kinds of crap because that's just how people talk." And he was like, "Well, okay." And mom comes out. We have a long conversation, and then mama says, "Now, can I go back in here and do what I came here to do?" And he says, "Sure, you can." And she goes into the safe room. And I can hear her attempting to access the safes, and they're beeping instead of opening. And we realized that the codes to the safes have been changed at that point.
Yeah, so let all of that sink in. I mean, it was pretty clear why Caitlin's dad was so confrontational and didn't want them in the room. He must have known that the codes on the safes had been changed, and he wanted to prevent them from realizing it at all costs possible.
One thing was they started changing the locks on the doors. They changed the locks on the all of Kirby's safes. He had a room that was full of safes that he kept his gold and silver in, and guns and everything that that he collected. And all of a sudden, I could get in them. I was the only one on this earth that had the combination to his safes, and I got in them on that Friday night to let the law take pictures, and I got in them on that Saturday and then on that Sunday, we went back down there, and I was gonna get in them because he had always told us that his final wishes would be in Towns' safe. So we went to Towns' safe, and I couldn't get in. There was only one safe that the combination wasn't changed on, and it was because she couldn't change it on that. She worked for TSC, so she knew, I think, how to take care of those kind of things. So I could not get in there on Sunday. And then I noticed that there was tire prints that were up to the back door, and I asked her dad, I said, who's backed up to the back door? So I got to looking, and sure enough, I could tell that there had been some things taken out of there. He did not admit it at all. He didn't know anything about the safes. They were the only ones there, but he kept saying he didn't know what I was talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. And him knowing that I was in the safes the day before and I couldn't get in them that day. So that really threw up a red flag. That was on Sunday after we had found Kirby on Friday.
So now we have these strange tire marks in the backyard, doorknobs that have been changed, the codes to the safe were changed. It was all suspicious, and suspicious enough for his mom, Maddie, to just straight up go to Caitlin's dad's car and check the trunk. And sure enough, it was filled to the brim with bags of silver that no doubt came from that safe. So that's probably why there were those tire marks leading up to the back door, if I had to take a guess, to back it up, because that is heavy. I mean, shady things were happening. And to make everything worse, or at least even a little bit weirder, Caitlin's dad, Jeff, was also just being straight up rude. At one point, he even said, "We are showing you all grace. After all, you are in our home." Okay, guys. Now, the first time I heard that, I thought that maybe Caitlin and Kirby had owned the house together since she and Kirby were in a serious long-term relationship. Maybe he was calling it our home because he figured it was his daughter's home now since Kirby was gone. Except as far as I know, Caitlin's name wasn't even on the house ever. It was Kirby's, and Caitlin was just living there. Again, I could be wrong about that, but the way that Kirby's family described it was like it was solely Kirby's property. So again, it just seemed like something weird was going on here. And the following day, his mom, Maddie, went and got an attorney, and she was named the administrator of Kirby's estate. So this meant it was now her job to take inventory of all of Kirby's assets and valuables, because none of that in any way, shape, or form was Caitlin's, and it certainly was not Caitlin's parents. Now, at this point, the investigators were still working hard to figure out what really happened to Kirby, but there were not any strong leads. In the meantime, on December 20th, right before Christmas, Caitlin, both of her parents, and baby Enola all packed their bags and headed back to Virginia where Caitlin's parents lived. Now, under any other circumstances, this wouldn't have been all that weird. It was almost Christmas after all, and they had other family members back in Virginia who they wanted to make sure weren't alone for the holidays. Totally understandable. It was just everything leading up to them leaving made it seem almost like they were now skipping town.
She would tell us she was sorry, that this has happened, and she would hug us and tell us she loved us and all that. And her family gets there that day, which was on a Saturday. And of course, they never leave again. And they stayed until they ended up leaving on the 20th of December, along with a lot of things out of Kirby's home.
And not only that, but according to Kirby's sister, it wasn't like they just packed a suitcase or two and headed out. They literally filled up an entire U-Haul with things that were in Kirby's home that no doubt had been owned by Kirby and not Caitlin. We know from his mom finding those bags of silver and gold in Jeff's trunk that they definitely weren't above stealing from a dead man. It just felt really gross, really weird.
I did tell them everything, that seemed off to me, and which they were already, I think they were ahead of me, actually. I think they were really ahead of me. Of course, they were used to things like this. I'm not. Yes, that's when they started really, cracking down, watching what was going on, trying to ask questions. And that Monday, she went and got a very high-powered lawyer that's from around here for Reese. And everybody knows that you only get for Reese if you're guilty of something.
Even though there had been some red flags and some arguments between the Carpenters and the Spences, Kirby's family continued to reach out to Caitlin after she left. They were mainly asking about the baby and wanting updates and photos. And not only did Kirby's family want to keep in contact to know how the baby was doing, but also, as the administrator of Kirby's estate, his mom needed to send child support checks on Kirby's behalf to Enola. So Caitlin gave them an address in Saltville, Virginia to send the checks to, and that's exactly what his mom did. She sent the checks even after the holidays passed, and Caitlin and baby Enola never came back to Mississippi. But to be clear, it's not like she disappeared from everyone else's lives, because for the first few months, Caitlin stayed in contact with Kirby's family. It was never anything super in-depth. They would message her, ask how the baby was, she would respond, she would talk about her, send photos of her. But they never discussed what was going on in Kirby's case or anything like that. It was always strictly just about the baby. Eventually, though, she pretty much just ghosted the entire family. She wouldn't respond to texts, Facebook messages, nothing. She also stopped sending photos. It was just radio silence on her end. So then July 2023 came around and it was coming up on Enola's first birthday. Kirby's family hadn't seen her in person since she was just a tiny little baby. I'm sure she had learned to walk since then, was maybe starting to babble, say her first words. So many firsts that they were missing out on, and that's their extension of Kirby, what they have left of him. So when her first birthday came around, everybody reached out to Caitlin, wishing the baby a happy birthday, hoping that maybe she'd be over whatever her problem was and would FaceTime them or send them pictures, something like that. Sadly, though, she just kept ignoring them.
For about a month or two after they left on the 20th of December, we could text her or whatever and ask for to see a picture of Enola or ask how she was or whatever, and she would talk to us. Then all of a sudden, she just quit. So, as of the last several months, no, we have had no contact. We have text. We even on Enola's birthday, we text. We tried to get pictures of her. We wanted to know how she was doing. She wouldn't. She never would contact us back at any time.
So that's when Kirby's family really started to go from just sad and annoyed about the situation to a little bit worried. And I mean, understandably, they had already been through so much in the past year. So unsure of what else to do, they called in a welfare check on Enola. I mean, best case scenario, a police officer would be able to see her, see that she was okay, and relay that information back to Kirby's family just to give them some peace of mind. But that's the opposite of what happened. Kirby's mom gave the police the address that she was mailing these checks to, and when the officers arrived, they were completely shocked by what they found. The entire house had burned down to nothing. Quite literally, the only thing still standing was the mailbox. Everything else had been burned to the ground. Was it arson? Was Caitlin unfortunate enough for her house to burn down by accident after everything else that had already happened? Is it possible it was an insurance scam or some attempt to destroy evidence? I don't know, but I do know that it is a giant red flag. So this obviously didn't help anybody feel less worried, not at all. Kirby's family hadn't been talking to Caitlin, so they had no idea what had happened or when this even happened. And now they didn't even know where Caitlin and the baby were, if they were okay, but there really wasn't anything that they could do. Kirby's sister even said that at that point they believed that they may never see Enola again, or at least not for a very long time. So a few more months passed, and the 1-year anniversary of Kirby's death was approaching, which I can't even begin to imagine being in the Carpenter's shoes, getting to a big day like that and knowing that the police aren't anywhere closer to solving the case or even naming a suspect. His story really wasn't getting much media attention at all. That is until there was a major break in the case. On November 30th, 2023, exactly 1 year after Kirby's death, shocking news came of an arrest. Caitlin and both of her parents, Jeff and Karen, had been arrested. Caitlin was arrested in Jefferson County, Pennsylvania, and her parents were arrested in Virginia. Each one of them was indicted on 1 count of conspiracy, 2 counts of larceny, and 1 count of capital murder.
I was actually in the middle of typing something about it being 1 year since the date that I lost my brother. And I had the whole thing typed up and was about to hit send, and I received the call from the investigator, and I just got chills on my body, and it's like I just knew. And he said, I wanted to let you know that Jeff and Karen Spence are in custody for your brother's murder. It doesn't change the pain that we feel. It doesn't change the loss that we feel. You know, Kirby's absence is felt every day. He was a huge presence in all of our lives, the community, our family, everybody. But I guess you could say we have a sense of security that we haven't had in a year.
However, here's the thing, and this is where it gets interesting, and I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts. We're now in 2024, and we still don't have a lot of updates of what exactly led to their arrests. I mean, clearly there was a lot of very weird off behavior on their part, but it's not clear to me what the smoking gun was that finally led them to getting arrested 1 year later. I do know that Kirby's sister Casey did a couple of interviews where she said that she knew more than what had been released to the public, but she didn't have all of the pieces yet. Understandably, she was very careful about what she said and didn't give anything away in fear that it could mess with a future trial, which is 1000% understandable. Her family has already been through enough, so the last thing that they need is for a trial to get pushed back or messed up because of things that maybe she said in an interview. And it's not just her that's trying to keep things quiet. Law enforcement has also been pretty tight-lipped. As far as I know, an affidavit for probable cause still hasn't even been released to the public, and that affidavit would usually be filled with tons of information surrounding the case. So that said, a few little things here and there are starting to come up about Caitlin's past and the backgrounds of her parents, specifically Jeff. Apparently, Jeff was pretty well known in his neighborhood for not being the most honest and honorable man. A few years before the murder, he even got in trouble for stealing from a local farm. So like I said, not the most upstanding guy. And based on what we've heard from Casey about his actions after Kirby's death, stealing all of the silver and all of that, I mean, it definitely adds up. It also recently has come up that a few weeks before they were all arrested, Jeff bought a house in Pennsylvania, in all cash. I don't know for sure, but I would guess that that home was probably where Caitlin was living since she was arrested in Pennsylvania. I also obviously don't know for a fact how Jeff got the money, but something tells me it probably had something to do with Kirby, whether it was from the things that he stole and then sold, allegedly of course, or something like that. Now, as far as I know, no trial dates have been set or anything like that, but I will be extremely curious to see how all of this plays out, and I am especially curious about what evidence is going to be presented. If Caitlin and her parents are found guilty for all of the charges against them, they could be in prison for life. For the conspiracy charges, they're looking at up to 5 years in prison. For the grand larceny charge, up to 20 years in prison. And for capital murder? Well, in the state of Mississippi, a capital murder charge could get them the death penalty. Now, since we don't really know a whole lot else regarding the arrest, we don't know what the investigators are thinking that the motive for killing Kirby was. But Kirby's mom, Maddie, firmly believes that it was for his money.
What my son had worked for all his life, I think, was the motive in this case. They stole a lot of things from the house, including gold and silver. They took a lot of things from the house.
Which that's just a tale as old as time, right? You get the money, you get the house, you get all of the things, but if it is for that, I mean, why not be more careful with it? Why be so reckless and sloppy? Get married first. Be entitled to that. Something feels weird unless they needed a quick buck, unless the dad stole and he got caught stealing. I don't know. What do you guys think the motive was here? The parents were staying with them for 4 months, so did they see how great the life was, the lifestyle, and they wanted that all for themselves? I don't know. But again, there wasn't any sort of legal marriage to where it would be entitled to go to Caitlin. I don't know. Right now, Kirby's family is still working on healing, preparing for what I'm sure will be a very long trial process. And more importantly, they're also working on getting custody of Enola and bringing her home.
Yes, we are praying. Praying very hard. Yes, I am in the process, and yes, I am going to do everything I can to get Kirby's baby home and teach her the right kind of way to live. I can't imagine monsters raising my baby. The monsters took my son. Of course, they are going to be in jail. They're going to be in jail for a long, long time. But Enola should be here with her family that loves her. She should be here with her brother that loves her. He has not got to see her since then. And, he does ask about his baby sister. And he's a very smart 5-year-old. Very, very smart 5-year-old. You don't get anything past him. She should be here. Yes, we are going to do everything in our power to get her home.
How do you deal with explaining to her what happened? I mean, making sure that Kirby's memory is alive, she knows about her father, sees photos and videos perhaps, but at the same time, learn about what her mother has done.
So that is going to be very touchy. I don't really know exactly how we're going to do that. We're going to raise her to know her dad. We're going to let her know how happy he was to have her. We're going to let her know how much he loved her. We're going to let her know what kind of man her daddy was. We want her to be proud of the man that was her dad. As far as being able to tell her what happened, that's probably can't even be answered now. It'll be a long time down the road.
What's interesting to me about this case is that you have a female defendant who committed this crime, but then also her two parents who are arrested in connection with the same crime. You're a mother, you're a parent. How do you feel about that? That these two parents worked alongside their daughter, allegedly, to murder your son?
Well, so that's a hard question. That is a hard question. I cannot comprehend it simply because I don't have that kind of evil in my heart. I don't understand how it could even happen, much less a mother and daddy and daughter with a brand new granddaughter. Take that child's daddy away from her. If you love the child, you're not going to do that to that baby. He was a big light in our lives, and he's still shining. Oh, Kirby. Kirby was great. He was a great guy. He was always happy. He was a hard worker. He was a risk taker, entrepreneur. He was like a jack of all trades and a many of all. He was good at all of them. He loved his family. He loved his friends. Most of all, he was in love with his two little kids. Everything he done for them. He always would say, "Well, look what I got for Towns," or "Look what I've got to put up for him," or things like that. He was good with people. He met people anywhere he went. He always left with another friend. He was just great all over, as far as meeting people, being good to people. I've had people to tell me since all this tragedy has happened that they've been in the like service station or something. They were running low on money, and he's paid for their gas, fill their tank up with gas, or they would go to a restaurant or something and go to pay for their food, and somebody would tell them, Kirby's already paid for it. And he was always good about stuff like that.
This case is just so tragic on so many different levels, and it's just so insane to me that the people involved really thought that they were going to get away with everything. Even more insane is that there really isn't a big motive other than some of Kirby's valuables that were in the home at the time of his murder. But I mean, was that really worth it? That money surely would run out sooner rather than later. So do you think that they were motivated by money? Or do you think that as this case progresses, we are going to hear something new and different? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I will definitely keep you updated as we follow this case. So make sure if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, you subscribe right now. Also, don't forget to buy those tour tickets. The link is in the description. And until the next case, stay safe. Bye.